They kicked him out, called him old, and washed up. So what did he do? Moved to the frontier, started raising overpowered waifus from every legendary race, and began building a new empire from scratch. Now the kingdom's strongest force is a nonchalant grandpa with a harem. Retirement? Nah, this old man's just getting started. So, still think exile was a punishment? Let's find out. This story begins on the battlefield where Hein fought a monster of the A rank, a huge boar, alone. No one could defeat it for so long, and the protagonist was sent on this mission. The monster was simply huge, but still could not withstand the skillful blows of the protagonist. In the end, Hein became the winner of this duel. Sometime later, he returned to the Adventurers Guild, dragging the huge carcass of a defeated monster behind him. When he entered the guild, two adventurers were quietly talking to each other. One of them asked the other, he heard that the rookie protagonist has a very high rank? Apparently he was promoted for defeating a huge boar. His interlocutor exclaimed in surprise, "Are we talking about that A-rank monster? Did he defeat it? No way, he definitely couldn't defeat it. Although the fact that he returned alive is already impressive." The protagonist approached the door. At that moment, a female voice called out to him. He turned around and saw a guild employee, his supervisor, in front of him. The girl exclaimed that she saw that he was safe, which was great. MC agreed with her. She continued that this task was just awful. Even though he was quickly rising through the ranks, his rank was still only C. The fact that to get to rank B he had to kill an A-rank monster was pure mockery. Getting even more irritated, the supervisor continued that the people above were simply pressuring him, they were simply giving him goosebumps. The protagonist thought that she was right about that too. The employee softened and said that, one way or another, she was very glad that he was okay. She asked if he had seen that horrible big boar. Hein scratched his head and casually replied that he had defeated it. It wouldn't fit through the door, so he left it outside. The curator did not believe it, and went out to verify the words of the protagonist. When she saw the huge carcass of the monster, the girl was amazed. What was it? Having dealt with her amazement, she asked him, "Is he really a human?" The protagonist only smirked in response. Waiting for her to issue him a certificate, he was bored at the issuing counter. The adventurers watching him wondered where he came from. Maybe he was from another kingdom? He did not look like a young man, but still a newbie. At this point, the girl apologized for the wait and handed him a piece of paper saying that it was his B-rank certificate. She added that, among adventurers, there are not many people of such a rank. It is considered high. The protagonist was surprised. Is it true what she said? The employee raised her head and said that she was very proud to have supervised him. He was embarrassed by the praise and asked her about the next task. She was surprised. He still wanted tasks? He should rest at least a little. The protagonist answered that it was the opposite for him. If he didn't move, he felt bad. The girl told him not to overdo it and went to get a new task. He thanked her and added that it was all because of his age. He proudly thought that now he was a real adventurer. The curator tried to reach the shelf she needed. He was lost in his thoughts. He never thought that he would become an adventurer at such an age, but so far, he was coping. The girl finally got out a box with tasks, went to the counter and said that since he was a B rank, there were many more requests. He was surprised. Is that so? The curator, sorting through the tasks, noticed that there was even a personal request from neighboring territories. The protagonist answered that he would take this task. She tried to object that it was not worth taking. It was too suspicious. She glanced at the task and was amazed to see that the request was sent from deep in the mountains, and his name was mentioned in it. The protagonist thought, although personal requests are suspicious, but still, why is his name there? What is the essence of it? The curator answered that the essence of this task is teaching children. MC asked again in surprise, "Children?" She said that this is all that was written there. Hein, without thinking twice, set out on the task. On the way, he thought about this request, but most of all, he was interested in who sent such a request than the essence of the task itself. Suddenly, he saw his destination in front of him and thought, this is a building hidden deep in the mountains. Approaching it, he was surprised to notice that the gates of the building were open. This was strange. Julius came out to meet him and said that they were waiting for him. Hein was amazed. In front of him was the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Golden Kingdom himself. Sir Julius? Confused, he asked the first thing that came to his mind. Why is he here? Julius replied that it was a strange question. After all, he was the one who sent the request. He thought that MC came knowing about it. The protagonist was embarrassed and noted that of course, his name was familiar to him, but he did not think that it was him, the minister. The customer chuckled and replied that he had heard about his situation, so he thought that this job would suit him perfectly. The protagonist clarified the nature of his work. The man noted that, as stated in the task, teaching children. He invited him to follow him into the building. When they entered one of the rooms, they were met by two girls. Riri said something like, "They were late." Julia asked her grandfather Julius, "Is this man standing next to him their teacher?" Riri objected that this simply could not be. Most likely, he is an assistant. The protagonist smiled and thought that it sounded like an insult. Julia, on the contrary, was sure that her grandfather was talking about him and became worried. Riri noted that she was too nervous, to which Julia apologized. The protagonist realized that these two girls were definitely not people. He answered Julia out loud that everything was fine. She had nothing to apologize for. He noted that Julia had a special shape of ears. She is definitely an elf. But the second one, Riri, surprised him. He asked her, "Is she a dragon?" The girl answered that everything was exactly like that. That's why she has nothing to learn from people. Hein was pleasantly surprised. This was his first meeting with an elf, and he generally considered dragons a myth. The protagonist took a closer look at Riri and realized that she was not just a dragon, but a representative of a superior race that could take human form and communicate with other creatures. The dragon girl saw the surprise on his face and told her friend that this always happened when humans encountered her. Julius noted that it was natural for them to underestimate humans, but in fact, they were expelled from their lands by humans, weren't they? Julia indignantly told her grandfather that such words made them very angry. He answered with a firm voice that they should learn. Otherwise, how could weak humans fight dragons? Riri countered that humans are incapable of anything alone. They can only win with numbers. The minister challenged her to prove it. Riri's eyes lit up with dragon light, and she asked him with a carnivorous smile, "Can she do this? Can she kill this man?" The protagonist frowned. He didn't really want to die yet. Julia said to her friend in fear that if she did that, the mountain would be blown away by the wind, but if her grandfather wanted it that way, she could do it. Riri was indignant that she couldn't either, otherwise the whole building would collapse. The protagonist said that since he had already walked to the very depths of the mountains, they could go out and chat more in the fresh air. When they left the building, Julia was the first to stand in front of him. He asked, "Were they starting?" The girl noted with surprise that he wasn't afraid of her at all, but that didn't change anything. She was sure that she could definitely handle him. She took a fighting stance and told him not to complain about anything later. She created magic circles in the air, which formed a real whirlwind. The protagonist noted with admiration that this is the magic of elves. Julia noted that this magical power is in no way comparable to human. Then she asked him if he was underestimating her because she was still a child. He smiled, thought that it was not the case at all, and with one wave of his hand destroyed her magic circles. The girl was amazed. What was that? He deactivated her magic with one wave? The protagonist advised her to concentrate. It is always very easy to lose control over magic. He began to attack her with his blows. The girl realized that she did not have time to dodge them. At one point, she was lifted into the air by a whirlwind. Then she began to fall, but the protagonist picked her up in his arms. He thought with relief that he managed to catch her. Riri grumbled in bewilderment. What kind of nonsense was that? Julia almost hurt herself. She would definitely not have made such a stupid mistake. The main character appeared next to her and noted that she too should concentrate better. She was surprised. What did he say to her? At that moment, Hein used his magical power again and directed it at the girl. A stream of magic suddenly enveloped her from head to toe. She screamed that he hurt her. She didn't even have time to understand how quickly he could get so close. The girl tried to respond with an attack, but he easily repelled them all to one. He noticed that she was hesitating. All her movements were too predictable. MC created a stream again, and she fell, hitting herself hard. Riri stared at him in surprise, and he noted that there was more. The protagonist continued that he really couldn't see through the flow of dragon magic, and that human abilities weren't comparable to dragon magic. And if he kept rushing forward, he would simply be destroyed by her power. But even so, he could still easily parry her predictable attacks. Heine saw her sitting on the ground with her head down and was worried about her. Maybe he had overdone it a bit? Leaning over to see what was going on, he never expected what happened in a split second. Riri jumped up, threw herself on his neck, and exclaimed with delight that it was cool. The girl turned to Julius and said that she agreed. This person was right for them. The protagonist, amazed by her reaction, tried to push her away, but she clung to him like pincers. He grinned and asked her if she could at least be softer with him. Riri replied that after what she said, she would hardly be able to rehabilitate herself. Julius watched his adopted granddaughter in surprise. Julia thought that it was unfair. Then she asked her grandfather who this person was. The minister answered her that Hein is a fighter of the army at the front in the Golden Kingdom. He is a legend who has graduated many skilled students, a court instructor. Julia was impressed by the regalia of the protagonist. MC, hearing his words, corrected him that he was already a former instructor. Julius looked at him thoughtfully, and Julia was amazed at the impudence of her friend, who still did not want to let go of the protagonist. After some time, the girls trained among themselves, taking into account their new knowledge and honing their blows. The protagonist and Julius watched their training. At that moment, the minister said that it was time for him and the protagonist to talk about the upcoming work. Heine was surprised. Isn't his job the education of these two girls? Continuing to watch their training, where Julia tried to cut off her friend's head, the minister replied that it was a request to the adventurer Heine, and the upcoming conversation is different. The protagonist listened to him with half an ear, because at that moment he was worried about what his students were doing. And only the minister's words that the conversation would be about a request to the court instructor made MC think about his words. He put a cup of tea on the table and asked, "The former, right?" Julius replied that this was not the final decision yet. The protagonist was surprised, even so. The minister heard that the prince expelled him, but at that moment he and his majesty were in another country, and it was he who instructed him to contact him, Heine. He would like to hear about the situation from his side. The protagonist thought, from his side? A few days ago, he trained Prince Idon. The prince was acting sluggish and eventually missed a punch from the protagonist, after which he fell to the ground. His maids immediately ran up to him, worriedly asking him if he was okay. MC realized that he had started skipping runs again. The prince cursed and angrily tried to get to his feet. The protagonist was surprised by his reaction. He said that this was not the end. The prince expressed a categorical protest that this was the end of it. The protagonist stared at him in amazement. The prince pointed his finger at him, called him an idiot, and said that this was the end for him. He is the strongest court instructor? This is complete nonsense. He showed disrespect to him. The protagonist asked God to give him the strength to endure all this. Idon continued that it was his disrespect for him that was driving him crazy. He doesn't care whether he is an instructor or not. He is obliged to treat his superior with respect. He has a talent, and his job is to help him reveal it. After which he laughed loudly and pointed his finger at him contemptuously. The protagonist calmly answered him, as he had said many times, it is impossible to reveal a talent that does not exist. Idon's rage knew no bounds. He called the protagonist an idiot and shouted that all the instructors except him recognized his talent. If he is not able to teach well, let him not shift it to him. The prince grabbed his sword and jumped up, intending to strike the protagonist. Heine deftly dodged the attack. Idon flew past him and plopped down on the ground. He cursed angrily. MC asked him what kind of instructors are they who recognize his talent? The prince laughed evilly and said that he did not give up on his training. He has a talent. You just need to wait until it bears fruit. You cannot even waste time. His eyes filled with hatred, and he continued that he, like his swords, magic, and even politics, should know his place. The protagonist looked at him calmly and thought sadly that it was very stupid to hear such things from the prince. He asked him out loud, and what did he want to say next? Idon pointed his finger at him and said that he, as a prince, was immediately banishing him from the royal court. He would never forget how he constantly belittled his talent. The protagonist was indignant that such a thing did not happen. The prince again broke out in rage and screamed at him to shut up, stop making excuses. Let him immediately pack his things and get out of here. The main character realized that the prince could not be convinced, so he silently turned around and walked towards the exit. Idon's maids ran up to him, began to massage him, and calm him down. He was melting from their attention. Suddenly, the MC turned around and asked him, "Does His Majesty know about this decision?" The prince got mad again and told him to shut his mouth. The protagonist did not say anything else, he thought. So that's how it is? He walked decisively to pack his things. At that moment, his assistant approached the prince and ingratiatingly said that it was an excellent decision. Although his father liked the protagonist, the heroes of the past are no longer needed in the present. He added that Idon was absolutely right. His talent is really huge and will soon blossom. The prince smiled at his assistant's speech. Heine fell silent, letting the minister know that his story was over. Julius said thoughtfully, "So that's how it is." In general, that's what he expected. He asked the protagonist, won't he receive confirmation from His Majesty? The protagonist hesitated with an answer. Julius continued that the prince claimed that he constantly humiliated him during training and also pulled him out and tortured him in every possible way. In addition, there are people who easily confirm such gossip. These are his maids and assistant. The protagonist was amazed to hear such a thing. The minister continued that the king would never believe the prince's words just like that, but there are too few of them for His Majesty to believe his version. The man continued that this is why he contacted him. The protagonist drank tea and remained silent, waiting for the minister to say. He noted that raising girls is just an excuse to buy time, although even if he had not been kicked out of the court instructors, the request would have remained the same. The protagonist watched the girls at this time, as after the battle they preened, asking each other about the quality of their appearance. Suddenly, Riri created a magic circle and shouted that she was starting. Julia was indignant. What was she thinking of again? Julius, looking at them, said that they are the young hope for the disappearing races. Julia, meanwhile, was indignant after Riri's attack that she had no pride at all. Riri laughed and noted that it was very nice to win. The minister expressed the hope that the protagonist understands that the girls can now live only thanks to the pride of belonging to a superior race. But this is not enough for them to simply survive as a species, not to mention living a happy, independent life. The protagonist smiled and asked Julius, "So everything is for the sake of future generations?" The minister sipped his tea and replied that this is not so at all. First of all, this should become an important project for the Golden Kingdom. Heine was surprised. A project? The man said that all his students whom he trained left their mark on future generations and influenced history. The power that his granddaughters crave is similar to this. Besides, if the state is on good terms with such races, they will make a good profit. He smiled at the protagonist and continued that such a grand plan could become a reality thanks to him. It was he, MC, who had a special talent for developing people. The protagonist replied that it was really useless to take care of a spoiled prince. Wasn't raising the next generation the most important thing? Julius noted that this was exactly why they called him here, so that he could do both. The protagonist made a pained expression and asked if this was really what he thought. The minister chuckled and said that it was exactly like that, and now they would go to the city. MC stared at him in surprise. The girls, hearing their grandfather's phrase, exclaimed that it was unfair. They also wanted to go with them. The protagonist and the minister looked down. Julius put his hand on the protagonist's shoulder and told him that the dragon and the elf are the ones who will lead the next generation. Meanwhile, in the kingdom, in the business hall, His Majesty and the prince were listening to the report of the young man who had come to them. He reported that the commander of the court knights, while the commander of the elite squad Red Dragon Jin and the only S-rank adventurer, Quora, all expressed protest against the expulsion of the court instructor, Hein. Without him, the work of all departments stopped. It is safe to say that this is a big problem for the entire kingdom. The prince objected that all this is nonsense. Why are so many people on the side of this scoundrel? The visitor was indignant. The scoundrel? They were all raised by him, so there is nothing surprising in this. Aidon said offendedly that he treated him unfairly. He is the future ruler. The visitor asked him, "What if all the aforementioned people rebel? Then the prince will lose the entire kingdom." Aidon exclaimed indignantly, "What is he talking about?" The speaker continued that only one person, an S-rank adventurer, and the other three named individuals were capable of redrawing the map of the continent. In addition, many of the instructor's students were actively involved in the life of the kingdom. The prince tried to find an explanation for this, but the speaker interrupted him and said that this proved the influence of this person. If the protagonist went to another kingdom, the advantage would not change in their favor. Aidon chuckled and again objected that his student's talent could easily be revealed without him. He had already said that this was not the case at all. At this point, the king intervened in the conversation. He answered the prince, like the fact that he had no talent. Aidon almost howled. He did not agree with this. His talent was confirmed by all the instructors. It will definitely manifest itself someday. His Majesty sternly asked him, did he not understand yet? They were faced with a situation where his ephemeral someday might not come, so they needed to settle this conflict. The prince was furious. Settle it? He humiliated him, the next king, by the way. He was just lucky that he did not unleash all his wrath on him. The king looked at him with irritation and said that if the instructor's story was different, he would not defend him. Aidon was indignant. Why? His Majesty wisely noted that position and status are far from everything. What matters is what a person achieves, and he, as a father, gave him such a chance. One way or another, until he hears the protagonist's story, he will be under surveillance. The prince's anger knew no bounds. The visitor said that this was all for his own good. Aidon did not understand what he was talking about. The speaker continued that there are many people who respect the protagonist, and therefore for now he should be more careful with his words to save his skin. Meanwhile, the protagonist, Julius and the girls went to the city to shop. Riri literally hung on MC. She was tired of walking, and Heine was not easy either. The minister looked at him and noted that he looked unwell. The protagonist replied that he was fine. Julius assumed that he hadn't been able to switch at all after their conversation, right? The protagonist looked at the girls and thought about his own. Riri, from the dragon race, was the daughter of the dragon king. Julia, from the elf race, was a candidate for the next princess. His thoughts were interrupted by the minister, who said that he would have to take up training, which meant that the future generation was safe. Heine was embarrassed and asked him if Julia was a candidate for princess. Did that mean she was of royal blood? She answered him that this was not the case. Elves choose the one with the highest magical power as king. However, they do not develop together, so there is no point in this. Julius noted that he was also trying to develop magical power. Julia indignantly pulled him up. Riri, who who had climbed onto the protagonist's shoulders by that time, laughed and said that dragon clans were also difficult to gather together. Hein, groaning from fatigue, noted that dragons and elves were indeed amazing, but both were of royal blood. He asked the minister what he was going to do. The man replied that all they needed to do now was stock up on essentials. At that moment, a crowd of people gathered near an establishment in the city. One man from the crowd, looking inside the building, asked why she is here. After all, this was the commander of the Red Dragon Squad named Jean. This was the most elite squad in the kingdom, and she was also its youngest leader. He wondered if he would be able to say hello to her. His friend replied that it was better not to. They lived in different worlds. It was really difficult to approach her. Jean was sitting at a table in a cafe and waiting for her order. The waitress, with trembling hands, carried the cocktail that Jean had ordered. The tavern owner told her to be careful. The girl approached the table where the commander of the elite squad was sitting and apologized for the long wait. But at that very moment she tripped and began to fall. Of course, the cocktail flew in one direction, the waitress in the other. Her horror and shame knew no bounds. She had to disgrace herself in front of such a person. Jean got up from the table, went to the waitress and silently picked her up in her arms. A murmur ran through the crowd. People excitedly said that the poor girl was very unlucky. Jean put the girl on her feet, smiled sweetly at her and said, "Good thing she was okay." The waitress was speechless from amazement. She could barely breathe. The owner of the establishment jumped up to them and began to apologize in a trembling voice. He added that he would bring her a new drink right away. The waitress was still in complete amazement at Jean's kindness. The crowd was buzzing about how amazing the commander really was. Jean returned to her table, clasped her head in her hands, and thought sadly that she was scaring everyone around her again. The owner of the establishment approached her with a new drink, once again asked her for forgiveness, and said that he would definitely talk to the employee. Jean replied that there was no need to worry and punish the girl. Everything was fine. She had no complaints against them. The owner was shocked, then smiled widely at her and warmly thanked her for her understanding. She thought regretfully, well, what pressure? Then she turned to the innkeeper. Could she ask him something? He readily responded to her request. She could ask him anything. Jean said that she needed to find someone. He asked who this person was. The girl thought about how to more accurately describe the person she was looking for. After some thought, she exclaimed, yes, she knows how to describe him. She stood up to her full height and said that this man was stronger than her. The tavern owner and the waitress thought about it, mentally going through everyone who would fit her description. The girl's request to the cafe owner instantly leaked into society, and the whole city was already discussing who he was and where to find him. Meanwhile, the travelers came to the city. Riri threw her hands up and exclaimed that they were finally in the city. People began to look at them. Julia tried to stop her, saying, this is not her first time in the city. Let her not run like that. The protagonist asked the girls, they both rarely visited the city. Right? Riri answered that it was so. They did not often come down from the mountains. He handed her something round in shape. Her eyes widened and she asked in surprise, what is this? The protagonist did not have time to answer her, because the girl simply ran from one shop to another like crazy and loudly admired everything around her. Julia stood next to the protagonist, like a pillar, and simply looked around. Hein thought, well, he, of course, assumed that they would stand out in the city, but this was somehow too much. He grinned and noticed that people were looking not at Riri, who behaved like a real child, but at him. People began to whisper, maybe this is he, whom Jin is looking for? Exactly, the age and signs match. Isn't this the same newbie? They say he is terribly strong. Someone said that it is hard to believe that he is stronger than Jin. The people just buzzed, discussing their versions, no longer embarrassed to look at the protagonist. He was embarrassed by such attention. Riri began to get irritated. She did not understand why everyone was staring at their teacher. The protagonist heard a familiar name in the crowd's discussions, and thought, Jin? Julius asked him if he heard. Hein replied that he did. The minister continued saying that it seemed that he was really loved very much. The protagonist sighed and said that she was really in a good position to come here so easily. At that moment, Jean appeared behind the crowd. She listened to the crowd's conversations and, not believing her ears, hurried into the very center of the crowd. One young man from the crowd turned around at the sound of footsteps, recognized Jean, and noted that they were lucky that they were in the same place where the man the commander was looking for was. The girl made her way through the crowd and joyfully called out to the protagonist, addressing him as a teacher Hein. She laughed joyfully and moved towards him. The crowd immediately began to buzz. So this was him that Jean was talking about? The protagonist grabbed his head. He was embarrassed by this meeting. Suddenly, the girl stopped. A stern expression appeared on her face, and she took up her sword. No one could understand why she suddenly behaved like that. Everyone was so stunned by the change in her behavior that it took them a while to realize that Riri had forced her into a fighting stance. The girl charged at her and showed all the skills she could muster. Jean didn't respond to her attacks. She simply blocked them, wondering who she was and why she was suddenly attacking her. Hein grabbed Riri by the scruff of the neck with one hand, like a kitten, and lifted her into the air. With the other hand, he took the spear from Jean. He said that the girls were not enemies. Jean did a backflip over her head and Julia was about to use magic, but she wondered what happened, and when MC managed to approach, Riri began to get nervous because Hein did not let her go. Jean greeted the protagonist and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. He doesn't know how she manages to smile in such situations. Hein turned to Jean and asked, "Anyway, but why was she here?" Jean smiled sweetly and said, "Of course, to return him to the royal service." MC laughed. He asked, "Is this not an order from the king?" Julius intervened in the conversation and said that apparently, and fell silent, because Jean spoke up. She said that since Julius was here, it means they can return to the palace. Hein replied that he was banished by the crown prince, and therefore he cannot simply return. Jean wondered why this happened. After all, the prince is much weaker than the teacher. She did not understand what kind of animal concepts these were. Hein explained to everyone that Jian was one of his former students. Now she is the commander of the elite royal squad, the Red Dragon. From the first meeting, she was full of talent, especially in terms of physical abilities. In this sense, she is somewhat similar to Riri. Since then, she has constantly improved her powers and has become the most powerful person on the continent. Hein said that he thinks that you can't consider yourself better than others just because of your strength. Jean replied that this is exactly what Prince Aidon said, although this is not about him at all. Really, if the prince said so, then let it be so? MC glanced at Jean and asked, "She did not beat the prince half to death, did she?" Jean smiled mysteriously. The protagonist said that she scares him. Jean asked not to worry. She replied that as soon as she learned of his expulsion, she rushed here straight from the mission. The protagonist thought about it and said, "Okay." Jean said, "But if the teacher orders to kill the prince, she will do it." Hein replied that he would never say such a thing. Julius suggested leaving everything as is for now, otherwise Hein will get more breakdown. MC agreed with this and asked, "Jean's statement about killing the prince, is that a joke?" Jean stood and just smiled. The protagonist said that she really scares him. The guild curator came running and apologized to everyone. She said that she heard explosions here and came running. She saw Hein and asked what he was doing here. There was an explosion. The people in the square froze in surprise. Julius said that it was very opportune. He was just about to suggest that the girls become adventurers. Julia and Riri asked again, "Adventurers?" At the guild headquarters, several men were talking about something over a glass of beer. Mr. Littard was sitting on a chair in his office and thinking, why did he have to be in this backwater? Was he a B-rank adventurer? He couldn't believe that an adventurer of such a rank could come from a provincial town. A man like him should have an exquisite name. For example, like his noble Littard family. Thanks to the prince's approval, he already had a bright future. Why bother with all this rabble? He heard the noise in the hall. He wondered if that adventurer had returned. Mr. Littard decided to check it out and slightly opened the door to the room. Hein entered the hall. One of the men in the hall asked, "Wasn't that the promising newcomer?" Mr. Littard thought, who was disturbing the order in the guild? Julia and Riri ran in noisily after. Littard wondered who the protagonist brought with him. Is that his hobby? Littard called the protagonist an idiot, and in his head he imagined these girls in undress. He decided that they were cute, and he could take them for his own use. Then the guild curator entered the room and said that she was very surprised. She did not understand how such a big explosion could happen. Littard left the room and asked, "What explosion were you talking about?" He saw the protagonist and loudly asked how he dared to sow chaos on this land and become a high-ranking adventurer. Riri and Jean started fighting again. Heine asked again, "Sow chaos? What kind of nonsense?" Jean looked angrily at Littard and asked what he said about the teacher. Littard noticed Jean enraged and was scared. Julius smiled and said that all sorts of people really gathered around Heine. Littard was even more surprised when he noticed Minister Julius. He asked how to understand this. Why is the Red Dragon commander here? And why is Foreign Minister Julius here too? Littard didn't understand anything, but decided to find a way out of this situation. The curator noticed the management and approached him. She loudly told Heine that this was Mr. Littard. He was the manager of the guild. She heard that he wanted to see the protagonist. Littard clenched his teeth and said that it was none of her business. Heine approached Littard and said that if that was the case, he was ready to listen to everything. Heine, Jean, Julius, and Mr. Littard were sitting at the table. Julia barely held Riri back. Riri didn't understand why it was impossible to interfere in the conversations of the elders. She was tormented by the question, what did Littard want from Heine? Beads of sweat appeared on Litard's face. Heine asked, "Was that request from headquarters Litard's order?" Jean asked Litard. He said to defeat an A-rank monster in order to obtain B rank. And all this was to evaluate the teacher's capabilities? Litard agreed. He said that's exactly how it was. Jean was delighted and shouted that such a task would be easy for the teacher. Hein scratched his head in thought. Jean asked what Litard was going to do if something happened to the teacher. She squeezed the manager's hand hard. Litard's eyes grew big in pain. Jean said that it was lucky that the teacher was strong. It would be hard to think that the adventurers who supported the kingdom could suffer because of such people. Litard gritted his teeth in pain and asked her to let go of his hand. Julius put his hand on her shoulder and said that it was enough. Jean came to her senses and apologized to the manager. Litard replied that everything was fine. Julius adjusted his hair and said that Mr. Litard was a man of noble birth and should be responsible for his actions. It would be difficult to find a replacement for him, so he would prefer to do nothing and let the manager decide. Litard tried to collect his thoughts and asked Julius to wait. The Minister of Foreign Affairs asked again, "What?" Litard explained that he was in this position by order of Prince Idon himself. There was a moment of silence. Julius thought about the fact that even though he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, he would not go against the prince. He asked Litard, "So what?" He proudly said that one should not underestimate the kingdom. Even though everything was not under his control, Litard had already reached the point of no return, and this was clearly visible. The manager tried to justify himself. Julius asked a question about Litard simply trying to humiliate one adventurer. The manager said, even if that was so. The man at the next table was outraged, just one adventurer. Was anyone surprised that the trust of the crown prince was more important? Julia and Riri did not understand what this man was talking about. This is a completely different value. Litard asked loudly, "Isn't this too small a reason to reject all his past achievements?" Julius replied, "Of course he can use such logic to shift the responsibility to them." The manager said, "That's exactly it. But he understands that this incident may be problematic, but just one adventurer is not an obstacle. Even if Hein is Minister Julius's assistant, he still has no right to go against him." Hein thought about his words. He was being belittled again. Julius said that Hein is not the kind of person who can be suppressed by the title of Crown Prince. No matter how much you say it, it still doesn't make sense. Hein asked, "Isn't this too much?" Jean answered, "No, it's not enough yet." The manager was indignant about comparing an adventurer and an aristocrat who has earned the trust of the Crown Prince. Julius answered, "That's exactly it." He added that this adventurer is an instructor of the best knight commanders who protect the kingdom. The manager was surprised. Julius said, "Not only commanders, but also many other talents, famous both in this kingdom and abroad." Julius looked at Jean and said that even she called the adventurer a teacher, right? Julius asked if the manager had heard of the stories about famous figures who support the state. Litard replied that it was impossible and that it was just a fabrication. Even if we thought that all of this was true, then why was the adventurer in such a place? Hein repeated, "In such a place." Julius explained that in short, it was Prince Idon's decision to support the manager. If it weren't for the prince, Litard might have stayed in his position. And now he has too many opponents. The manager was scared and said that he didn't know anything. He remembered that the conversation was about a request. And with his authority, he can certify MCs to A rank instead of B rank. He asked if the protagonist would agree to such a proposal. Someone in the room said that the manager had been talking trash about adventurers the entire time, that even the food had become bland. Litard heard the words and thought that the others were starting to show off too. The manager asked if that was not enough, he could certify the MC to S rank. And then Prince Idon would not be able to do anything in the capital. Heine thought about it. Riri shouted that it was enough already. Julia asked Riri to excuse herself and asked if the adults had finished talking because the children were bored. Heine said that he did not want to see such shameful behavior from an adult anymore. The manager cursed. He pulled out a dagger from its sheath behind his back and ordered everyone to be quiet. He shouted that he would never acknowledge the protagonist. He asked who he was to be a hero. Jin and Julius stood up abruptly from the table. Heine said, "Now he's caught." While Jean was swinging, Hein jumped over the table, hit Litard's hand, knocked the dagger away and came up behind him. He held the dagger in his hand and said that he didn't think such a thing was necessary for the conversation. All the adventurers present in the hall opened their mouths in surprise. The protagonist was able to take the knife in just 1 moment? Jean proudly said, as expected of the teacher, he was much faster than her. Riri asked Julia if she saw how fast it was. Julia replied that she barely managed to keep up. That was awesome. Litard didn't understand what happened. Hein whispered in his ear that he asked him to stop. Jean was delighted. Julia and Riri admired Hein. The manager was lying on the floor in complete confusion and asked if they could talk again. Hein noticed the adventurers in the hall staring at him and asked them why they were staring like that. A girl with a broom and a black hat approached the guild building. The men standing at the entrance stared at her. She said hello and walked past. One of the guys asked another why she was there. The girl went inside the guild. She said that everyone was so surprised by her arrival that they froze. There was something hilarious about it. Hein said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. This girl's name was Quora. The protagonist asked her if she had become even stronger. Quora smiled and replied that it was thanks to the teacher. Mr. Litard jumped up from the floor and approached the girl. He called her by name and said that it was good that she came. Quora was surprised. She waved her finger upward and directed magical power towards the manager. The power tied the manager like a rope. Litard asked Quora if she understood what she was doing. With a slight movement of her hand, she pulled out a bundle tied with a ribbon from him. Quora said that he had ruined many promising newcomers on his own whim. She threw the bundle up, the ribbon came undone, and down flew written sheets. The curator picked up a couple of papers and said that these were interrogations and investigation reports of adventurers who had suffered because of this man. It would take a long time to study everything. The manager tried to say that it was a mistake, but Quora covered his mouth. She said that all these documents needed to be studied. The papers were scattered all over the hall. She ordered her assistants to quickly clean up and collect everything. Small copies of Quora flew around the room. One of them accused the other of scattering more and more. The other screamed that it was not her fault. Quora plugged her ears with her fingers and said that she could not hear anything. The assistants put everything in a neat pile and tried to pick it up. The guild curator asked if she could take these documents. Julius answered, "Of course, no problem." Jean asked Quora why she was here. She replied that she should ask her. Jean thought, right, this is an adventurers guild, and she is not one of them. Riri hurried her. Jean shouted that she would become an adventurer. Julius smiled and said that he was afraid that this would turn the whole kingdom upside down. Quora barely restrained herself from laughing. Jean turned around and asked what was funny. Quora replied that there was nothing funny. The minister's answer was just spot on. Jean asked her to stop fooling around. Julia looked at the protagonist from afar and thought that it was amazing speed. Hein asked Quora, so she came for reports. She replied that she simply heard about a promising newcomer and thought it was him and decided to see for herself. Jean asked Quora, so she came to find a teacher? Quora agreed. She said that since he had become an adventurer, they could now have fun together. Hein asked if Quora had forgotten that he was only a B rank. She said that with a rank like that, there was no balance in requests. The adventurers were whispering that Quora had come to have fun. Hein said that there was no way to have fun until he advanced with those two. Julia and Riri looked at everyone with fear. Julius said that the girls had just registered, so the number of requests would be limited. The curator agreed with this. She said that while Mr. Litard was in this state, she didn't know where to start. Quora said that she had assumed this would happen, so she had prepared everything herself. Can dragon treasures also raise your rank? There is a place in the Longles Mountains north of the capital that is rumored to be the tomb of a dragon. It is said that he died a long time ago, but he was strong enough to change the mountain range. Quora asked if there was treasure there. Dragons have a special ability to find treasure, so the request was to find the valuables buried there. Jean asked who the customer was. Quora answered that it was a rich merchant from the capital. She would sell him the treasures. Jean thought about it because few would take on this request. Quora answered, of course. After all, in such requests, the client ultimately receives the treasure. And if you go without a request, then you can appropriate all the treasures for yourself. The Longles Mountains are open to everyone, and although there are monsters there, they are not particularly dangerous, especially if you find a good place. Quora had already imagined how everyone would covet those treasures. Jean said that if the girls go with them for treasures, without a request, they themselves will get rich. There's a chance to get something more valuable than money. Quora held a paper in her hands and said that the result of the request will depend on the value of the treasure. Riri did not understand anything. Hein summed it up. So if there are a lot of treasures, it will be possible to sharply increase your rank in one go. Quora praised him. She said that the client himself will invest a lot of money in the guild. And if he is satisfied with the result of the request, then we can talk about promoting to A rank or even S. Riri was happy. Jean asked Quora if she is not one of those who hate such sharp promotions. Quora answered, that's true, but doesn't Jean see how the children's eyes light up? In such cases, you can be patient. Quora asked Jean if she will accept that the teacher only has rank B. Jean sharply answered that by this logic, the teacher is even weaker than Quora. Quora said that it is so, and for the teacher, it will be necessary to introduce SS rank. Jean replied that it is a good idea. Hein asked Julius, maybe he should think about it too? SS rank. The journey began. Riri ran out of the forest and screamed, how huge? What mountains? Julia and Riri raised their heads up and looked at the sky. They were surprised there was something huge flying there. Riri asked what kind of huge bird was that. Julia told her, "It's a griffin." "Isn't it obvious?" The protagonist said, "Now it's clear, even though there is no rank limit. The question is, how far can you go?" Riri answered, "Cool." The protagonist continued, as Julia said, "The Longless Mountains are vast and harsh. In addition, there are many high-ranking monsters in them. Therefore, few people overcome even half of the way." He asked them to prepare thoroughly. Riri said belligerently, "Well, let's go." Heine exclaimed, "Stop." He told them that they were going to the mountains, so they should be prepared for anything. There are many dangers around. The girls turned around and looked at him questioningly. They saw that he was worried. Julia asked him not to do that. She said that she had access to both magic and plants, and Riri said that she would easily get meat. The protagonist said, "I see." Riri told him to rely on them. He just needs to walk next to her. MC thought for these two the mountains are like home. Julia said that she and Riri will be able to prove that they can cope on their own. The girls began to move away from him. He watched them go. They turned around once more and glanced in his direction. He admonished them, it seems, that sometimes being reckless is even better. The girls were surprised by his words. At this time, in the city, Jean was worried. She also wanted to go with the teacher. Julius told her that the fact that she was here was already a problem. He suggested that they at least be happy that there was an opportunity to return the instructor to his rightful place. Cora supported him, for sure. She suggested that Jean go back where she needed to go. Cora said that she would take care of the teacher. Jean indignantly asked Cora, "Does she want to get rid of her? How mean." Suddenly, the curator came up and apologized. She turned to Mrs. Cora and said, "You called the Capital Branch." She was very excited and whispered the information to Cora in her ear. Cora listened and was surprised. "Seriously?" Jean asked her. "What happened?" Cora told, "To be honest, in the Longless Mountains, there are not the tombs of the dragon, but his house." Jean was horrified. "What?" Cora continued, "There was no news about the dragon, so people began to think that he was dead. But since there is magical power, it means that he is alive." Jean asked, "Hey, are you sure everything will be okay?" Cora answered, "The protagonist is in the most unexplored part of the mountains. The teacher will not be so reckless as to wake the dragon." Jean asked Cora, "Was there ever a time when the teacher was not reckless?" Cora thought about it. At this time, somewhere in the mountains, a group of people were walking. One of them turned to the leader and suggested that they rest for a while. The leader apologized and said that they were already behind. At that moment, the girls, Julia and Riri, rushed past them. They knocked one of the tourists down. He asked what just happened. The girls just waved at them. Julia turned to Riri and said that the teacher was no longer in sight. Riri replied that Hein was really fast. She saw him in the distance and said there was a column of smoke. She could smell Hein there. Julia said that with Riri's abilities, it was convenient to search for someone. When they arrived, they saw that it was really the teacher who made a fire. He was glad that they had come. Julia asked if it was Mr. Hein who defeated those monsters. He confirmed it. There were 2 huge dead beasts lying behind him. Riri was happy and asked if she could cook meat for everyone. Julia was surprised at how fast the teacher moved and defeated the monsters. The teacher called her, "Hey Julia, take it." He handed her a cup of drink. MC asked her what was wrong. She froze. He told her that he was planning on walking a little further before it got dark. But if Julia wasn't feeling well, maybe they should rest? Julia said it was fine. "Wait, what do you mean walk a little further?" He said, "Do you?" They weren't even at the starting line yet. Julia looked at him and wondered what that meant. Riri asked Heine if it was okay for them to be the only ones continuing on. He asked what she was talking about. She said, "Well, everyone else is having such a hard time getting there. Wouldn't they think it was unfair?" He was surprised. That's what she meant. "Well, the others are no match for them anyway." He said he just wanted to get there soon. Riri said, "Oh, those mountains. Do they need to go there?" He confirmed it. Riri jumped to her feet and cheerfully waved the nod bone in her hand and said, "Well, then let's get going." Julia asked her to wait and explained that there were many dangerous monsters there. She had to be careful. Riri said that everything was fine. She could easily defeat them all. Why was Julia so worried? Julia replied that she shouldn't be so naive. Riri said that everything was under control. The protagonist scratched his chin and thought that this could turn out badly. Riri had no experience, so she wasn't being careful. On the other hand, Julia had no experience either, so she was being careful. This was a request from Quor, so he was sure that sooner or later some kind of catch would appear, which meant that they had to go faster. This was his practical experience. When they finished eating, he turned to the girls and asked if they needed to practice a little before going any further, didn't they? They stood up and saw a huge monster. It was a demonic monster, an Almirage. The girls were very surprised at how huge it was. Julia said that an Almirage was an ordinary monster. There shouldn't be any problems with it. But She felt the teacher looking at them and asked him if they really needed to fight in such conditions. He was surprised. In such conditions. The protagonist turned to the girls and said that many opponents would be larger and more cunning than them, so they needed to take this into account. Now Julia would have to fight only with direct physical attacks. Riri, on the contrary, was forbidden to use this. Julia asked again, that is, they needed to show their weaknesses? The protagonist answered that when they use strong abilities, they easily win. But there could be many situations where this would not be possible. Julia said that she did not quite understand the point, but she thought that she could win without touching. The monster rushed to attack them. Julia turned to Riri and said that she would go on the attack and asked her to back her up. Riri agreed and asked if she could handle it for sure. Julia said that she could use amplification magic. She folded her hands together. Even with amplification, her light attacks would not go right away, so she will put all her weight into the blow. She attacked it, but the monster dodged and swung to hit Julia. She was scared. The monster was too close, she could not avoid the blow. Riri came to the rescue. She attacked the monster. Almiraj dodged this time too and jumped to the side. Riri was surprised. Wow, good dodge. Julia apologized to Riri. Riri said that everything is fine. However, the monster is very fast. Julia said that she is not sure, but she has one strategy. Riri agreed with her. Okay, go ahead. Julia was indignant. What if nothing works out? Riri replied that she does not always understand Julia, but she is very good at strategies. And Riri knows this better than anyone, that's why she always believes in Julia. Julia agreed and said, then now she will explain everything. She quickly explained what and what. Then Julia said that she went on the attack. This monster understands her attacks well, so then he instantly dodged the blow even from the blind spot. But because of such a quick reaction before the attack, he leaves a small pause. Julia shouted, now, Riri. Riri confirmed, okay, go, and also went to attack. Julia jumped high and delivered her most powerful blow to the monster's head. She exclaimed enthusiastically that she hit it. Riri, worried about her friend, also shouted joyfully, calling her by name, that she succeeded. The girl thanked her with all her heart. At that moment, the sound of heavy footsteps was heard. Julia saw another monster behind Riri and exclaimed that it was not over yet. Let her take care of herself. Riri looked back, saw the enemy, and thought that he was very close. She did not have time to dodge. The protagonist thought that there was nothing to be done. He shouted to the girl that she could use magic. Riri replied that she would do so. She created a magic circle with a powerful force wave and heard Julia gasp. Riri turned to her and told her to move away so as not to hit her. The dragon girl rose into the air, said, well, it's time to begin, and blew with all her might. At that very moment, a magical wind appeared, which nevertheless knocked Julia off her feet, and she clung to the main character. Riri took another deep breath and blew harder, directing her blow at the monster. Powerful wind currents swirled around it, which destroyed it. The girl descended to the ground, and the amazed Julia said, how good. All it took was to use Riri's magic. But the monster's conqueror covered her mouth with her hands and said that all this was true, but she couldn't use it often. Julia was surprised. Why? Riri explained to her that her breath could summon a dragon. Her face expressed extreme concern. At the same time, not far away in the Longles Mountains, an anxious Jean asked Kor. Nothing had happened yet, had it? The S-rank adventurer listened and replied that everything was fine for now. She added that the teacher was strong, but if the ancient dragon awakened, it could be a huge disaster. Jean countered, on the contrary, it was good that the teacher was there. Korra disagreed with her. If such a strong dragon awakened, the whole kingdom would be in trouble. Here Julia agreed with her. That would indeed be the case. The knights and high adventurers would not have time to come. Korra replied that she and the protagonist were equal in strength to the S-rank, but this time, even their abilities might not be enough. Jean said that in her understanding, then she would need to count on the help of the children, Julia and Riri. Korra agreed with her, and asked her friend if the girls were really as good as she expected. Jean was overcome with both friendliness and a little hostility towards the girls, so she answered her friend that they were not that bad. Korra chuckled at her, noting that she was a total tsundere. Jean was surprised. Tsundere? What is this? Some kind of product? Korra theatrically protested the squad leader's ignorance. Meanwhile, Julia remembered that Riri had told her that her ability could summon a dragon, but so far nothing was happening. The protagonist replied that if every use of such power summoned a dragon, it would be hard. He thought, well, although the main problem is that Riri herself does not understand anything about her powers. At this time, the dragon girl was delightedly trying to catch butterflies. Julia noticed that it had become completely calm around now. The protagonist confirmed that this was so. Now, at this height, they could relax and start searching. After walking a little, the allies saw a wonderful landscape at the foot of the mountain. Riri's breath was taken away with delight. Julia said that they had reached such a beautiful place. Riri exclaimed that it was an amazing view. The protagonist thought that they were only looking for treasure, so that should be enough. Riri suggested that her friends go even higher. Julia cut her off so that she would not shout like that. MC turned to the girls. He asked them, they know what level the monsters around are, right? Julia answered that there would be no problems. Riri also answered positively. She added that she had defeated such monsters many times. The children went ahead of him, admiring the nature. He looked back, examined the defeated monsters and thought, well, of course, the rank of the monsters is quite high, but the girls are also very strong. The protagonist suggested that they start searching for treasure here. Riri, her eyes wide open with delight, asked him, is it okay already? Julia grinned with a satisfied face and said that she had already outlined her path. The protagonist answered them that he would wait for them here. The girls answered that they understood and went in search of treasure. After some time, Riri shouted to the protagonist that she had found something. She addressed him by name, raised what she had found above her head, and exclaimed that she had something. Julia said enviously that she had finished quickly. They brought what they had found to the protagonist, and all three of them assessed what they had found. Riri's loot consisted of gold coins and acorns. The protagonist was surprised. Acorns? The girl replied, well, at least they had a hat. Julia's loot consisted of an incomprehensible golden object. MC asked what this strange shape was. Julia replied that she didn't know for sure, but it was probably something from past civilizations. The protagonist summed up that so far everything had been going well. What do they think? Let them continue in the same spirit. The girls understood his call and went off to search again. Thus, the girls returned with loot and left again, returned and left. After a while, the protagonist sat down to drink some water and said that it was amazing. In front of his eyes was a whole mountain of treasures. He took one of the items and thought, as expected, the girls felt at home here. Only for some reason they did not return for a long time this time. Suddenly he heard some noise and went to where the sound came from. An embarrassed Julia came out of the thicket and said in an apologetic tone that she finally got out. She got a little lost. The girl showed him a large round object and asked him, is this also a treasure? MC confirmed that it was. Julia happily said that this was great and added this item to the general pile. Looking at the whole mountain of treasures, she noted that they would exchange it all. Suddenly, a joyful girl unexpectedly jumped out of the same bushes. She was holding something like a necklace in her hand. The protagonist shuddered from her unexpected appearance. She giggled and remarked what kind of absent-minded idiot he was. The protagonist, stretching his legs, heard her remark. He asked what she said. Grabbing her hand, he quickly laid the unbearable girl on the ground with a painful hold and twisted her arm. She screamed in pain. At that moment, Julia called out to him. They were dragging some kind of statue in their hands and shouted that they had found something. Riri noticed a new face and, turning around, let go of the statue, pinning Julia's hands. She poked her finger at mine and was surprised by the shape of her ears. Then they realized that the creature was in a protective sphere. Riri cursed and asked, what was that? Mine warned her that she better not do anything strange. Then she remarked that she thought that all the people at this request would be weak. Riri was indignant. What kind of nonsense was this? She growled and told her to shut up. Mine looked at the girl in fear and asked her, was she a dragon? Riri answered that she was. Julia, wincing from the pain in her arm, was surprised. It turns out that there were those who also managed to get here. Riri asked her friend with a guilty look, did her arm still hurt? And asked Julia for forgiveness. Mine was amazed. What was the elf doing here? The protagonist approached them and thought in surprise, was she a beast man? Only he had never seen such ears and a tail before, and apparently she also has a high rank. He asked Mine if she could tell them more about herself. She laughed and told them to listen to her. Her name was Mine, and she was a divine beast. The protagonist was amazed. A divine beast? Julia told him that she had heard about them from her grandfather. It was a supreme being that could take human forms. Riri exclaimed, just like her. Riri was a dragon in human form. Merging with the most numerous race gave her many advantages. The protagonist asked Mine what her goal was. She was surprised. Goal. He pointed out that if she was looking for treasure, it was everywhere, wasn't it? Mine replied that that was not her goal at all. Suddenly, Mine took on Riri's appearance, which confused the girl. She said that she just liked to have fun with people. The protagonist was as amazed as Riri at how Mine had transformed into her. Julia was amazed and remarked, what a character. Riri meanwhile asked Mine, could she become meat? Mine answered her, did she want to eat her? Then she regained her former appearance, which angered the dragon girl. Mine stretched sweetly and told them that people rarely met here, and she had free time. Couldn't she play sometimes? The protagonist was surprised. She doesn't have a family? It seems that divine beasts have parents, or not. She answered regretfully that they don't know anything at all. Riri was indignant. Heine knows everything. Julia tried to calm her friend down. Mine continued that divine beasts are not born like others. She is on her own. MC did not cease to be surprised by the information he received. Riri wanted to say something again, but Julia closed her mouth and asked her to be quieter. The elf understood what Mine was talking about. Divine beasts are not born from other divine beasts. A person, so to speak, is accidentally born like this. Now, everything became more or less clear to the protagonist. So, Mine was looking for friends. He asked Julia if she could remove the protection from their guest. The girl asked him if he was sure about it. Mine resisted this, and, making a sad face, asked them, would they mock her, right? The protagonist asked her if she was lonely, right? Maine was surprised by this, and so were the girls. He continued a lonely life, with nothing to do except hang out with random people. Boring, isn't it? She answered him. He speaks as if he knows everything. So what now? What is he going to do with her? The protagonist asked her. Will she go with them? He thought that these two girls would want to be friends with her. She tried to answer him something, but she was interrupted by Riri, who emotionally expressed her agreement with the protagonist's proposal. Mine grinned. Should she be friends with these little ones? Although, okay, if they insist, then she will go with them. Both girls were happy with their new friend. The divine beast asked them, so what now? Riri exclaimed that it was obvious. They will continue the treasure hunt. Whoever brings the most is the winner. Julia remarked to her new friend that if she ran away, she would lose to them. The girls ran forward. Mine looked at them and said that they were naive if they thought they could defeat her in this forest. She suddenly rushed after them, playfully threatening them that they would regret challenging her. Just let them not deceive her later and count everything correctly. Riri laughed and protested. No way. Mine was indignant. What did she say? The protagonist looked at them with a smile and thought about how interesting everything turned out. A dragon from the royal family, an elf, a candidate for princess, and even a divine beast. He did not know what Julius was thinking, but things took a really interesting turn. By the way, maybe the strange magical power that arose now was caused by Mine's presence? Meanwhile, Jean and Cora arrived at the knight's camp, where everything was calm. Jean exhaled. They made it. Cora objected to her friend. She thought that it was not so. Jean was indignant. Why was she saying that? After all, nothing had happened yet. The adventurer replied that for now it was so. Only the dragon had already woken up. At that moment, the earth trembled, and the night adventurers, who had been calmly talking before, became worried. They began to ask what it was. An earthquake? Cora sighed, and with the help of magic created some object that looked like a high pedestal. She dragged her friend up to the top of this structure. Having created an antenna from a copy of herself, she activated the magic radio and gave it to Jean. The commander asked her what it was. Cora replied that it would help make the sound louder. Jean smacked the radio, turned to the knights, and said that the commander of the Red Dragon Squad was talking to them. The knights were confused. What the hell was going on? The men looked up at the platform and were surprised to recognize the girls as Jean and Cora. Jean continued to tell them to calm down. The earthquake would soon subside, but they still had to evacuate. Cora handed her a map. Jean navigated it and added that the closest city was Oudia. They should run there. If they ran from here as far away as possible, then they would guarantee their safety. One of the knights exclaimed in irritation. What the hell was going on here? Cora advised her friend to report the reason carefully. Jean was silent for a moment and told them that the dragon was awakening. Panic arose among the adventurers. Jean added that, one way or another, they needed to head to the nearest city quickly. One of the adventurers protested. He believed that they as adventurers should stay here and accept the fight. The second one objected to him. Let him stop saying stupid things. They can't compete with a dragon. Jean looked at the panic of the people and thought that they would only get in the way, so they should leave quickly. Reason took over the minds of the knights, and they all rushed to run from this place. Jean said relaxedly that everything was super. Cora objected that this was not true at all, thinking that since the teacher was here, there would be no more damage was wrong. Jean seemed to wake up. Her friend reminded her in time that she needed to quickly find the protagonist. At this time, the girls pressed themselves against the protagonist in fear. Riri asked what just happened. Julia answered that she did not know, but even the spirits were scared. Mine said that, apparently, he woke up. Riri asked her who she was talking about. Mine was surprised. She did not know. It was a dragon. Riri was amazed. A dragon? It was her? Mine replied that she didn't mean that. Of course, she was a dragon too, but the one she was talking about was something else. In short, it was a large lizard. The protagonist asked her if they could get around this lizard. Mine replied that they couldn't. This dragon was scary because it had grown even larger over several hundred years of sleep. It was capable of killing living creatures while they slept. At that time, the allies saw a griffin flying out to get prey for its chicks. Behind the mountain, it was struck by a dragon's blow, and the griffin fell like a stone. The astonished protagonist said, "Did he just kill a bird?" Mine replied that the dragon only kills because they were approaching it. Suddenly, everyone seemed to hear someone's voice which said that they would not have time to hide. The female griffin fell into the nest and scared her chicks. They squealed, begged her not to die. They were afraid to fly outside the nest. They would die of hunger now. Julia said in shock that even the griffin had lost his life to the dragon. Mine continued. Besides, since the dragon had woken up, his power was increasing even faster. Even if they defeated him, the entire forest would be destroyed. And if they lost, the entire continent would be destroyed. Riri, holding her breath, ate sweets to relieve her stress. Julia said that she had a terrible sweet tooth, but everyone understood that it was becoming dangerous. The protagonist thought that the dragon itself had already become part of the area, only its movement would destroy the forest. One thought occurred to him. He asked Mine, did she not want the forest to be destroyed? She answered him irritably. What was the point of answering? If they did not escape, then they would end along with the forest, right? The protagonist looked intently into her eyes and said, if she said that she did not want, then everything could change. Divine Beast quickly guessed what he was thinking. She asked him in amazement, did he want to try to deal with the dragon? Had he completely lost his mind? Even she, a divine beast, can't do anything. What can a mere human do? MC noticed, but there is something in this forest that she wants to save. Or is he wrong? He saw memories from her childhood, about her parents, about her life in this place, pop up in her head. So the protagonist asked her directly, did she want all the memories of her family to be destroyed? Mine clenched her fists tighter. The protagonist continued that, unfortunately, it was difficult to protect the entire forest, so he needed the exact location of an important place for her. Riri approached her and asked her to speak quickly. Then the girl asked her, did she want candy? Mine screamed at him to shut up. She already said that there was no point. What difference would it make if she said it? They had just met. What was the point of worrying about her family, especially since she was gone? Everything was mixed up in her head, childhood memories. The griffin, she jumped up and ran away. And again she heard a voice telling her to run faster. They wouldn't have time to hide. She wanted to run away without worrying about anything. But if they die, then don't let them hate her. Julia sighed heavily and said with regret that the protagonist tried so hard. He told her that everything was fine. MC had an idea. He asked Julia if she could ask the forest spirits about the place that Mine wanted to protect. The girl was surprised. Was he still going to do it? The protagonist reassuringly told her that it was just a dragon that had been sleeping for many years. She replied, well, yes, it was sleeping, but what Mine said was true. If it gets out of control, the entire continent will be destroyed. Those who live for 1,000 years, although dragons are not originally divine beasts, gain a divine origin, even if they are not directly connected to the royal dragon blood. If this happens, he will become the most terrible monster, capable of rewriting history. That's what she's talking about. Riri asked, can she become such a dragon? Julia, ignoring her friend's remarks, continued that therefore they need to run quickly. If they do not have time, there will be big problems. The main character thoughtfully said that running away is, of course, a good option. Julia interrupted him. This is not just a good option, but the only one. MC looked at her and asked, can't she see it herself? The girl stared at him in bewilderment. What is he talking about? Hein suggested that she calculate the enemy's strength and their combat power. She thought that, on the one hand, she was right about their escape. Riri was on her own at that moment. She decided that there was nothing to be done. She needed to turn into a strong dragon. Julia continued to think about the protagonist's words. On the other hand, if you look at it that way, the protagonist is incredibly strong, Riri has stunning power, and her magic can be an excellent support. Only, there were definitely divine echoes in this dragon. What could they do against him? The protagonist noted, maybe she'd have looked even more closely? She asked again, even more closely. Taking his words literally, she began to peer into the distance this way and that. Eventually, her head began to spin, and she fell. At that moment, Riri called out to them and told them that it was too late to run anyway. She pointed to the mountain on which the awakened dragon was located. He stood on his front paws and let out a terrifying roar. The allies took a fighting stance. On the other side of the mountain, the adventurers were running as fast as they could, and Jin and Quora were approaching the dragon. Meanwhile, in the royal capital, loud knocks were heard from Prince Idon's room. It was the prince himself, raging. He thought indignantly, why should he sit here? Kicking the papers on the table with his foot, he was indignant. All this routine, what good is it to him? It would be better if useless people who only know how to write papers did this. And he deserved better. It shouldn't be like this. And everything is happening because of that damn instructor Hein. Many support him, the prince. He said that he would wait for the instructor's testimony. But if the man dies, he won't be able to say anything, right? Then he should have found like-minded people. There were guards outside the door. Then he would try to escape through the window. He went to the window, squeezed through it, and realized with horror that he was stuck in it. While passing by, heard his groan. He quickly figured out what was going on and approached the stuck prince. Idon didn't expect anyone to witness his disgrace, so he told the commander of the court knights that he seemed to have trained too much, and because of this, his butt had become larger. Of course, Weil realized that this was a lie, and ironically asked him, "So it was training?" Then, it was a good thing. The prince turned to him and said, "What a timely thing." He asked him to help him get out. Weil carelessly replied that he could help. But shouldn't the prince be under house arrest? The prince got angry and told him to shut up. It was none of his business where he was and what he was doing. Weil smiled heartily and noted that the prince was right. After all, he was an adult already. He had the freedom to decide everything on his own. Idon thought narcissistically. Wow, even Weil would recognize his strength if he threatened him. He grinned and said arrogantly, "Of course, Weil is a commoner, but to be the commander of the knights is a very high position." He looked at the commander conspiratorially and remarked, "He himself understands what he is talking about." Weil answered him with dignity that, just as he, a commoner, was able to take his post, so too, for everyone in their state there is freedom, helping to achieve results. The stupid prince answered him that this is exactly so, his kingdom. Weil was amazed. His? The prince exclaimed, "Of course, he is the heir. Very soon his time will come. Does he understand it? He is a natural-born nobleman, trained and prepared. Everyone already understands that he is the next king." Weil, quietly laughing to tears, answered that everything is clear to him. He turned to the prince and asked his permission to ask one question. "What is he doing here then, if he is under house arrest?" The prince hissed at him, saying he told him it is none of his business. Then, he thought he could order him to do it. Adon turned to him and said he came to him because he realized that with him he would always be safe, right? Then they should work together. Let him use his knights to punish the man who humiliated him. Weil clenched his teeth and replied he wanted to make sure of something. He was talking about that court instructor named Hein now? The prince replied that he was talking about him. He was no longer a court instructor, but simply a traitor. Let Weil immediately seize him and destroy him. The commander of the knights firmly said that he refused such an offer. The prince was indignant. Why? Weil swung at him so that his neck scarf covered half his face. The prince arched in fear and screamed. What was he doing? The commander hit him on the head. Idon howled in rage. Had he forgotten who was in front of him? He was the first prince, the face of the country. Weil pushed the scarf away from his face and said with a smile so that the prince would not worry so much. If he screamed, he would be found, and the current situation would be rather difficult to explain. Idon became wary and asked him what he was talking about. The commander replied that he was talking about nothing. He asked the prince what was the reason for the protagonist's dismissal. The prince snorted and noted that it was obvious. Why should he lose his freedom just because he kicked out a person who had shown disrespect to him? Weil exclaimed that being free was normal. Only freedom had its consequences. He twirled his sword in his hands and very deftly put it to the prince's face. Idon asked him in a stuttering voice what he was doing. The commander wisely noted that if he was using his freedom, then he should accept the consequences. He should have chosen his words more carefully. The prince fearfully asked him to stop because he had already explained everything to him. The commander continued, "What is the most important thing? Why didn't he say? It was all to protect himself." Idon remembered his father's confidant saying that many people admired the protagonist, and he did not think that he, the prince, could cope. He wanted to say something to the commander, but Weil interrupted him, and continued that his crime was the unfair exile of his own mentor. And also, he deprived him of a parental figure for which he would have to pay. At these words, the commander raised his hand with a sword above his head, which made the prince sweat. Weil said that he was glad that the prince did not try to escape. He declared that His Highness could enjoy the last seconds of his freedom, and let him accept the consequences. The commander swung and placed the blade of the sword on the prince's neck. Idon was sweating from the strain, and Weil smiled. Then he put away his sword and said that it was a joke. He opened the window, and Idon fell out of it like a sack, hit his head, and lost consciousness. The commander remarked that now that he thought about it, he realized that there was a pebble stuck in the window through which His Highness had tried to escape. He said ironically that His Highness was so unlucky that he had tripped over something like that. What a pity. At that moment, his knights called out to their commander and thanked him for his deed. They looked at the lying prince and asked each other what they would do. One of them answered that they would simply drag him back to the room. Smiling, they told their commander that they would not bring him back like that, while laughed and told them that it seemed like taking care of such a person required a lot of strength. He hoped to make their task a little easier. Although, it would be easier if he simply cut off his head. The knights were amazed at his words. Weil continued that, again, if he died, it would be problematic. The knights agreed with him on this. It would be inconvenient. They dragged the prince into the room. Weil looked at the sky and thought about the protagonist. Even though he was late, he was curious about how he was doing there. Meanwhile, the protagonist and the girls were watching the dragon. Riri was lamenting that it was her fault. What the dragon was doing at the top was indescribable. His powerful roar caused a landslide and everything around shook. The protagonist noted that it seemed like he slept very well. Julia grumbled that now was not the time for jokes. Riri supported her friend, that she said it right. She sleeps better. Julia told MC that lying is not good. Will they really be okay? The protagonist, without taking his eyes off the dragon, answered her that he hoped so. Suddenly, the dragon felt the protagonist's gaze on itself. It turned in his direction and opened its mouth at him with all its might.